Hello, everybody, and welcome to Amicable Academy. This is a presentation by Georgia's Amicable Divorce Network. And today we have two of our members as our expert panel today. We have Angie Rehkop, who is a chartered financial professional and a certified financial professional with financial care providers. And we have Allen Harris, who is a family law attorney, even though it says Angie on his camera is Allen Harris, and he is a family law attorney out of Roswell, Georgia. And today we are presenting to you the presentation of Are You Financially Prepared for Divorce? And this is a conversation between two professionals. A divorce is often a team approach. It takes a village and many different professionals to have an informed divorce and an educated divorce and to arrive at a good result. So Angie is going to be talking today about what you need to do to prepare for the divorce process. And then Alan's going to be explaining what a divorce attorney does with that information and documents. How do we prepare for a settlement? What do we do with that information? So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Angie and Alan.
Hey, thank you guys. Alan and I have been looking forward to this. Just getting ready and getting prepared has been a lot of fun working with Alan. I divorced and I have had one divorce of my own. It was in 2003. I had a 2.5-year marriage and it was the longest 2.5 years of my life. I also, unfortunately, had the opportunity to be my mother and father divorced when I was 4, and my mom and stepdad divorced when I was 18. So I've got a lot of perspective on what's going on and who the players are. I am a chartered financial consultant, a certified financial planner, and I thrive on clarity and certainty. And that's the different bumps in life have just created me that way. And designing a divorce settlement with blinders on is just not really recommended. Some people go into divorce, they don't have any idea of what they have or what they need, and what they come out with is simply a surprise. That is just not the world I like to operate in. And I believe that when our clients are in a situation of uncertainty, more certainty we can give them and more clarity we can give them so they can understand what they're going through and what their choices are and the consequences of their choices, the better off for the divorce settlement is in general. If we can get all the cards out on the table, explain things thoroughly, hopefully we can create a more amicable community and diffuse some of the potential problems that happen during the divorce process so we can get through it more quickly, more efficiently, and make the best use of the money for that family. I started out, Alan and I pulled together a list. What information needs to be gathered and why? I went through, and as we're doing this, please go ahead. I do have the chat up so you can throw questions into the chat. Any loan documents that you have, debt seems to be a real trigger subject. So any loan documents that you pull together or trust agreements. I usually get 2 years of tax returns, but Alan had some other thoughts on that.
Well, sometimes we need more than 2 years of tax returns, very often 3 years of tax returns, and maybe even more, depending on whether there's been 1 year has been an anomaly of or deviation from the norm. Also, we will get business returns and statements, W-2s, 1099s, and K-1s for years when returns are not ready.
I always want to get like payroll and income statements. It never ceases to amaze me that as years pass in a household, people don't know who is being covered by what. If there's pension plans, retirement savings plans, employee benefits booklets as to who has insurance, where insurance is available for the family. I would hate it if you thought your husband was continuing to cover the kids with medical insurance, maybe was not, or had left his job and it was no longer available to him. Life insurance, getting really specific on the documents. A lot of times life insurance are self-owned. I'm not real pleased with many life insurance agents because they'll make me the owner, me the insured, and then my spouse the beneficiary. If you've gotten with a good professional, they will have it cross-owned. And one of the things you don't want, you need to be very clear about who owns the policy, who's insured, and who's the beneficiary. A lot of times after divorce, policies are left in place. Let's just say a wife owns it, she's the insured, and the husband believes he is the beneficiary. At least that's what happened when they went through the settlement process. That's what the paperwork said. If the wife is the owner and she is the insured, she can change the beneficiary at any time, right? So that may not be good. If that husband is depending upon that insurance to fund his children's education, maybe in the event that she dies, we want to make sure that he stays in control of the wife's, of what he is supposed to benefit from. Any annuities or long-term care disability policies. And like I said, it never ceases to amaze me. This is my industry, so I'm a little more aware than most of what people have and what they don't know about. The approximate title and values of homes, real estate, vehicles, mortgage or loan statements. Do they currently have wills and powers of attorney, social security statements, checking accounts, credit card statements? And what are the limits on those credit cards? You look at this, and if somebody's going into divorce for immediate concerns and you're looking at expenses, how much credit do they have available to them? Do they need more for reasonable expenses, or should they have less because you think they may go out and fill that credit card up to the max just to be vengeful? And I make sure I have all the savings, CDs, and money markets. Allen?
Angie, we also will ask for the actual deeds. Sometimes that's important, and the prior closing statement for the purchase of the home. That'll contain some information sometimes that we need.
Well, and just for Allen and I, starting out with the correct information, it avoids unnecessary confusion, costly mistakes, and additional conflict. We're trying to create a settlement agreement that makes the most of your assets for both parties and the children. So starting with accurate and all the information greatly increases our clients' chances of settling quickly.
If there's any prior agreements, any prenups or any postnuptial agreements, we need to get a copy of those early on. If there's been any prior discussion about resolving the case, like who will stay in the home or whether the home will be sold, we need to get that information. If there are any appraisals that have been done, we need to get that information. If a business needs to be evaluated, the business evaluator like IAG would request some specific documents that we would ask the client for. If there's been any, if you have any statements that support a claim for a premarital interest, we want those documents. Any loan applications, any financial statement that either party has submitted, we'd like to get those documents. And then we also will want to get or help prepare a DERFA, or domestic relations financial affidavit. We're going to take the information and help the client prepare the DERFA. A DERFA, or domestic relations financial affidavit, it's got three parts: the income, assets, and the expenses. And we need the information that we're getting from the documents and the other information to help prepare a domestic relations financial affidavit.
Yeah. What I start out with, once we get all the information together, you can see what's liquid, what assets are available, how they're titled. And I sit down with both parties at the table and find out what actually do you need for the immediate future, because I'd like to get both parties set up so that they can go for the next, I don't know, maybe 6 months without having to have a conflict over who's going to pay for what. And it's just getting very literal about it. It's hard to believe that a lot of people are living in the same households and are really not aware of 100% of the bills that are going on in the house, that they really just don't know. Looking at the property taxes, are they coming due or are they included in your mortgage? That can be a big ticket surprise that people don't expect because it's not part of your monthly bills. Kids' tuition or camp enrollment, no one wants to fight about that. What are estimated taxes coming up? Because you'd hate to put somebody on hold financially and have them fall behind on their estimated taxes. So when they come out of this, they end up with a big bill that they're looking at. Business licenses that they might have. Do you have animal expenses? Are there home repairs coming up? Additional counseling. How many of the people that get involved in a divorce, and as things start moving down line, they think they're okay and they end up accumulating large bills for counseling for themselves, for their children, to deal with what's going on. And also banking in some time away. Are you going to go ahead and plan to get the kids out of that environment and take them on a vacation, or give one or the other spouse a chance just to get away with some friends or to visit family and have some downtime? Because if we can give people a safe space and a safe time that's designated, that they can just sit down and have some emotional repair time, they can get through the divorce process a lot better. At some points, people are just worn out and they're going to fight about anything. So if we can go ahead and map out 6 months so that for all this time coming up that these things are taken care of for you, you can deal with things a little bit more rationally and aren't quite going for the jugular because your immediate needs are taken care of. How many of you had divorce cases going on this past March when the market took a big downturn? That you had things in process? Did we think about it back then? I mean, when you sat down and you started getting a divorce, did you think, well, in the next 6 months, do I think we're going to start a pandemic? Do I think the market's going to tip? What should be going on in our brokerage accounts? But a lot of times, once you start the divorce processes, these accounts are frozen. Or at least for some people, you hope that they were because the market came back. For some people, they might not have been. What do you have going on? And how do you protect those assets? Individual stocks, you could go in, and what I counsel people to do is put stop loss orders or trailing stop loss orders on all the equity positions. What this means for me is if you owned Apple stock, and let's say you thought if it dropped by 10% that you would like to sell it. You don't want to see it drop any more than 10%. You can actually create a trailing stop loss. Depending upon the brokerage platform, they're either good for 90 or 120 days. And the trailing stop loss moves behind Apple as Apple moves up. If Apple drops 10% or more, it will sell that stock and it will help preserve the value. So if during the time frame that you're in a divorce, you've got equities, you can actually put a floor underneath those to make sure that during the pandemic that they sold and you didn't sustain unrecoverable losses. Mutual funds, which are a very popular option for a lot of people, they really don't have a stop loss option. And you need to look at your funds and determine, let's say if you were in a lot of assets right now and the market is very high today, it's high in perspective to what went on in the past. We don't know what's going to happen to it in the future. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace. One of the things you need to look at, maybe it sounds good to get to a more conservative position, but is that conservative position going to cause the tax consequences? Do they have an awful lot of capital gains? And are there any losses that we can set against that in order to get them in a less volatile position? I painfully see how people ask me, how should I divide investments? That can be really subjective. A lot of people say, 50%, easy enough. 50% of the value, 50% of the shares. one client said, look, the account was worth 20,000. I just need a check for 10. And maybe that was a better solution for her. Maybe that avoided having a tax consequence that someone didn't have to sell and actually split the account. So getting clear on what the assets are, what the tax responsibilities are. And in advanced cases, you may have spouses that have greatly different tax brackets. So you might want to take the highly appreciated assets and give them to the spouse with the lower tax bracket, and the assets that don't have as much tax exposure and give them to the client with a higher tax bracket, and then take the tax consequences and net them out against the amount and balance out the monies that way. Part of that, every dollar I can save from taxation is dollars that can go back into that household and back into that family. And being clear in your settlement agreement on how the settlement is going to happen and when the settlement is going to happen. I've had people whose divorce settles and they come to me shaking the paper and saying, he settled with me. He settled with me. When am I going to get my money? I need it. I'm behind. Right? When is he supposed to deliver the check? No one put in an exact date or an exact time frame. They didn't explain. You can pick any of the companies that we work with. I'll just pick Fidelity because we all know them. Fidelity takes a huge responsibility as a fiduciary to hold other people's money. Let's say they hold an IRA for Allen. If Allen's money disappears from his IRA, he can go to Fidelity and cause a big legal stink, right? Because Fidelity is responsible for what happens with his money. So if Allen were to get a divorce from anyone, Fidelity would set up an IRA in his soon to be ex-wife's name. They have to have all the legal documents to back up why they moved assets from Allen's social security number to somebody else's social security number. And if lawyers show up and say, you moved this money, Fidelity wants to put all the paperwork in place. That's why Fidelity is not going to transfer all these assets of one person to T. Rowe Price in the name of another person. So if people simply understand the process that the companies have to go through, it avoids a lot of misunderstanding. They can understand and feel in control of the process while the assets are getting taken care of, and we can settle out without a lot of discord. A story I lean back on, probably within the last year, there was a divorce case. The husband came back to his wife and asked her for the transaction history of the brokerage account they shared, since she retained the original brokerage account. He had sold some of the assets and he needed the cost basis so he could calculate his capital gains taxes. That's what he asked her for. She didn't understand investments. She heard taxation. Something that he wanted from her account information. She got upset, and they certainly did not have an amicable divorce, and they did not have an amicable attorney. They racked up over $2,000 of bills before I got involved and told them that all we needed was the history and this is what it was. He didn't want any money or anything. He just needs the number of when he bought it and how much he bought it for 3 years ago.
Angie, in our settlement agreements, commonly we put a provision that the stocks or the accounts going to be divided with a neutral allocation of any kind of capital gains and losses. But
right.
What you're saying is it might be to the benefit of maybe shifting a little bit more to the party that is going to experience less taxes or maybe in a lower tax bracket. Is that right?
Yeah. Right. And even when you're going through the settlement process, if I have 50% of the assets, but it has a high tax consequence to use it, is it really 50% of the asset? And going through and looking at netting up, what are the assets like? So, and like I'm saying, if I can save money from from taxation and be a little bit more efficient. That's more money for a family.
If we're doing that, though, we're going to have an accountant, because the lawyers are not going to be able to give them advice about that. So an accountant's going to have to, either their personal accountant or financial advisor, to advise about that.
Correct. And getting involved and just understanding the money and hearing it from different perspectives. I work with several different attorneys that just call me up and say, hey, can I buy an hour at a time? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And we go ahead and bounce ideas and throw questions off each other and talk about the tax consequence and the actual write-up of what's going to happen, so they can understand what it's going to take administratively for, to process a quadro, which seems to be a black box in the world, that everybody wants to say quadro, ooh, and they don't really know what's happening, when it's a very simple process. But if you understood it, you'd understand why there's administrative hangups, and it would help you navigate them a lot better. So I try to get very clear with the professionals involved so that we can set up expectation and prepare documentation to be accurate.
I know something that we sometimes don't think about, that can be a valuable asset, is the carryover losses that a party has.
Excellent point, Alan.
If there's significant carryover losses, then one party can, if one party keeps those carryover losses, they've got a substantial benefit to offset future taxes.
Yeah, and offer them the assets with the higher taxes, because they've got the losses to net it out. Once again, a great technique to keep more money within the household. For me, I just really believe in being as kind as I can, being as firm as I can, and being finished. Because if we can get these things just over with, and agreements that are not rolling agreements that they get renegotiated every 6 months, that people can move forward and have much better lives for themselves, and in my perspective, much better lives for their children and the people involved. Alan?
Before I start talking about what we do with the financial information and financial documents, just a couple other things that as far as like personal property and furniture, it's probably important to take an inventory of the valuables in the home, and you may want to photograph or videotape household valuables or personal items, especially if you suspect that a spouse may try to hide some of these valuables. If you are not aware of some of the financial accounts, but you see mail that's coming in from financial institutions, you may want to make a list of those financial institutions so you can follow up with them about accounts that may possibly exist. Some of the documents that we talk about, that some documents may not be needed in every case, but these are documents that are generally needed, and some are case dependent and vary depending upon whether there's variable income or whether there's a business involved in the case. And some of these documents a party may not have access to initially, and they may have to obtain the documents once the divorce process begins. And in most cases, a client will come to me and they will not have all the documents that we need initially, and we have to start gathering them through the divorce process. And what do we do with the documents and the information? We start off with preparing a DERFA, as I mentioned earlier. In the amicable process, we exchange DERFAs, in the case early on. And the amicable process is a pre-filing process, but we will exchange the DERFAs. If we are in a case that is not in the Amicable Divorce Network process, we will, in the case it's filed, then uniform rules will require us to exchange DERFAs. In some cases that are outside the process and that are settled before you file the case, and you're going to file as an uncontested, You may not be required to have a DERFA, but I always want one anyway, because then you have a sworn affidavit that lists the income and the assets in the case. In the divorce, the Amicable Divorce Network, in this process, there's the provision for us to exchange documents, and the attorneys will confer early on and agree on what documents need to be exchanged. And that would be a time where, I may tell the opposing attorney that, I need 2 years of tax returns, or I need 3 years of tax returns, or I don't really need that much because my client has all the information. But it's the time for us to come in and list, out what we need to exchange in an amicable process. Outside of the amicable divorce process, we have informal discovery and we have formal discovery. Oftentimes we will exchange documents like we do in the amicable process, just through the informal, what do you need? Let me know what you need and I'll provide those documents to you. If we get into the formal discovery process, usually it's a lot more extensive production of documents. I take the documents and early on start working on a marital balance sheet, putting together, a list of the assets, all the assets of the parties, and then start working on how we would propose dividing the assets. With one, are you going to sell the house? Or is one party going to keep the house? And then how are we going to balance the rest of the assets? I would think, in most of the amicable divorce process cases, the settlement or resolution is going to be a 50-50 division of the property, probably in almost all cases. And that's what happens in most cases, is close to a 50-50 division. But that's not always. I mean, there are a number of cases that I settled in 2020 that, were maybe 55-45, or, somewhere there was some reason for not dividing the assets 50-50. So after getting all these documents, we can start evaluating the case and providing the client with guidance. We can prepare a child support worksheet if there are children involved, and give some idea of what child support would be in a case. We can start thinking about and making some recommendations regarding what alimony will look like in the case, if alimony is an issue. So we take these documents and this information and we start evaluating the case and provide our thoughts regarding a possible resolution and what we think would be a reasonable settlement in the case.
Nice, good. How about we open the floor to questions? Does anyone have questions or comments? Okay.
I had a question from early on about the life insurance policies and the owners of those.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you're having people set up their policies so that the opposing party, the opposing spouse is the owner, how much difficulty do they have when the case is owner to be over, to be able to change the beneficiary then on the policy in their name so that their former spouse is no longer their beneficiary?
Good question. Tracy, are you married now or no?
Yes.
Okay, let's just say, and for instance, let's say you and your husband were divorcing and you had children, and you have an active interest that you need to get money in case he's not there to take care of his kids. If he owns the policy, he has the right to change the beneficiary of it at any time he wants to. So if he owns the policy and he's the insured, and they have you listed as the beneficiary the day that the divorce happens and that everybody puts all their stuff out, the very next day he can submit paperwork and change that beneficiary to anyone he wants to. If he dies 3 days later, the beneficiary, if you own the policy, you can change the benefactor of it, because the insurance company is not policing any of this. They're just going to go what the paperwork says.
And I guess my question depends on, at what point they come to us and what their situation is, because if there are minor children, then yeah, our
Yeah, okay,
agreements would
so
normally have something that says they have to keep life insurance, with,
it's negotiable, but here's the deal. If you're depending upon his insurance to fund your kids in the event that he passes away, a lot of times we're changing around the owners of insurance during the divorce process, which before your divorce is final, there's unlimited gifts between spouses. So we can just change the owner of the policy from husband to wife. As long as everybody signs the paperwork, it's fine. You would like to be the owner, he could be the insured. And if you need to pay premiums on that, that can be part of the divorce negotiation, right? You can negotiate that for alimony or consider however you want to do it. But if you own it, you can maintain who is the benefactor on it always. If you own it, you can keep yourself as the beneficiary and you have complete control of it. And he cannot, whoever is dependent on that money, I like to have as the owner of the insurance. So it can't be switched on you without you knowing. And that's
Angie,
just
more often than not, though, we have the situation where, I would have the party, like, for example, the husband's going to have to maintain, $1 million in life insurance policy, and he's going to name the wife as the beneficiary for the benefit of the children. And then he has to keep that policy, and he has to provide proof upon request that he still has the policy in effect and he has the wife named as the beneficiary. That's what we commonly will have in our settlement agreements. And then we have usually a provision that if he doesn't do that, then it's going to be, there's a first charge against his estate for.
But if he is deceased, then if he's deceased and let's say the beneficiary is not what you think it was, then there's a whole nother issue. And I just try not to go there. I mean, if Tracy, if you need that money, I want you to be in control of that.
that's, I'm wondering, are you suggesting that we start building into our agreements then language that says not only for so-and-so to be designated as the beneficiary and to be provided documentation, but we should also be asking for
You're splitting up the other property
to be named as the owner?
If you're splitting up the other property, the ownership who is property of a life insurance policy, that's just another asset. And what I would ask for is that if, like, maybe you have it for both, that each of the spouses is cross-owned and they own the life insurance policy on one another. So that if it does that way, you have certainty and it can't be changed.
And
we need to
just
have
a follow-up,
an insurance agent come speak to us and perhaps sort some of these out, because this is an interesting question. I think this is why it's good to have people from different professions, because as attorneys, we are all like,
I do
owning the policy, the other spouse owns it, has to maintain it, and all of that.
I am a life insurance expert.
Not everybody on the call today is an attorney, so we had a question of what's a DERFA. So I just was going to answer that really quick, and then probably end our recording, but the conversations can keep going. But for those who aren't attorneys or associated with dealing with these documents all the time, a DERFA is slang, so to speak, for a domestic relations financial affidavit. It is a Georgia form. That's a name specific to Georgia. It is a 5-page, sometimes a little bit longer document that is a summary that each party to a divorce fills out that lists their assets and their monthly budget. So as attorneys, mediators, financial professionals, we all look to that document as a summary. And it is signed under oath and penalty of perjury that what you've put on there is absolutely correct. So you see those almost all the time in any case involving property, child support, alimony, and things like that. So I'm just going to take just a brief minute to thank Angie and Allen for their presentation today. Everybody that's on the call, stay on. We're going to continue to have some discussions, but for everybody that is tuning in later, we're going to go ahead and end our recording. But I want to thank you.
And I put my information over in the chat again, Tracy, so that if you want it, you got it. But I was going to say, and you and I were going at the same time, I am a life insurance agent, and I've got a lot of experience. So anytime you have a question, I don't bill for all my time. I'd like to build a relationship with you. Just pick up the phone and say, hey, Ange, I got a question for you, and bounce something off me. I'm completely open to that.
So it sounds like we probably need to have Angie talk to us specifically about life insurance to flush out all of our questions.
And
So
I've got
it's interesting
people,
to
I got people more better than me too.
all the different topics that touch family law. And so one thing that we're passionate about with the Amicable Divorce Network is getting our members to be the best trained professionals available to people, but also getting the best information out to individuals who are facing divorce. So I'm going to thank everybody for attending today, to everybody who's watching this video after the fact, and especially to Angie and Allen for preparing their presentation today on how to financially prepare for divorce. If you have any questions at all, you can always email Tracy at amicableddivorcenetwork.com. Thank you, everybody.
Hey.